All right, we're live. Hello,
Woo.
Sahil.
Hey, how's it going?
I'm doing well, thank you. I'm doing really well. How about yourself?
I'm doing good. Yeah, cranking through the last 2 weeks of 2022 before at least my last professional business weeks, I guess. Trying to cram as much stuff into 2021 as possible so that my 2022 can be super boring. Always my
Yeah,
goal. So
I,
see
I
how.
think that's yeah. There's did you know a guy called Nat Eliasson?
Yeah, I know of him. I've never spoken to him personally, but
Right. I listened read his newsletter, and he recently talked about the concept of working in seasons, which I really like. You have some seasons, maybe like it's the winter, where you really knuckle down and try to be really productive, and then other seasons where obviously the weather might be a bit nicer and you're a little bit more flexible in your schedule, and you make time for spontaneous plans and that kind of thing. And that resonated a lot. Anyway, so what we're here to talk about is, this is what I was just telling you just before we went live, is I've got an idea for a piece of software that I think could improve my own life. This is something that you talk about in the book, is solving your own problem. And I want to know, is it viable as a business? Are there other people out there who also could be helped by this kind of ambiguous piece of software that I have in my head? So I just want to download as much information from your brain in this hour as we can. So I think probably like the best place to start is I'll just give you a quick overview of like what the idea is and like how it's kind of come about.
Awesome.
Basically, I've got a app that I want to build, which has come out of some problem that I've been facing in my day job, working at Airdev in the learning and development team. We're a software agency. We build apps for clients. We have product managers, we have developers, and they all work remotely. And when they come into the company, then they obviously need to be trained in and onboarded in our processes, how we do things. And the way that I've been managing this for one of these roles, the product managers, is they have basically a program that they follow, which is a mixture of asynchronous and live content. Some of it might be reading some of our documentation, watching videos, joining live sessions, like live lessons that I'll be running, and exercises that they do. Like if they're a product manager, then they might do scoping exercises and this kind of thing. And what I struggled to find was a tool where I could basically plug in all of this different stuff that I wanted people to do on certain days. Like, because sometimes they want to read something before they have to do the exercise, or we're doing a live session that covers some of the content that they should have already read. So I want to control the whole experience in a scheduled way. And I didn't find a tool that could really kind of do that. It didn't need to be super heavy duty. It could be quite lightweight. So what I ended up doing was share my screen with you here. Can you see my screen okay?
Yep. Looks good.
Awesome. So yeah, you've already seen this on the failed live stream, but just to recap for everybody, this is a coder doc that I'm using to manage the program, basically. So there's sort of like this master doc where I plug in what everyone should be doing on certain days, and then I think this is the phrase you use, I basically fork this version for every individual new starter. So they have their own version, and then I plug in a specific start date, and then the days that they actually have to complete stuff by is automatically calculated, and we can check off kind of where they are. And they have everything in one place. So that's basically like, there's two main values for this, is like me as the course coordinator, I can plug everything in really easily and manage the schedule really easily. And then the person who's actually taking the onboarding, the new starter, they have everything in one place. So that I'm not having to kind of send them stuff over email and send them Slack messages and say, do this, and then do this, and then do this. It's just all within one document. And I'm pretty sure that given this new remote kind of world that we're living in, I can't be the only person in the world who is trying to figure this kind of remote onboarding stuff out. So what I kind of want to know from you is, how should I go about thinking about how to abstract this problem that I'm facing out of just me, Matt Neary at Airdev context, and figure out who else in the world, I probably, people doing this similar job in similar companies,
totally,
has this problem. How do I find them? What should I even share with them? How should I even think about what the problem is that I'm solving here? Yeah, there's probably a few questions baked in there, but just curious to get your general reaction.
Yeah, no, I think it makes a lot of sense. I think it is the right approach to basically solve a problem that you have first, and then worry about, do other people also have this problem? Generally, there's enough people out there that there's probably somebody else, right? Ideally, it's someone that you know already as well. This is why in the book, I talk a lot about starting with community. The reason I think community is so important is because you want people who know you and are willing to give you feedback, because the truth is most customers are not very open to giving you feedback. The standard feedback is silence, right? Just like no response, no nothing, right? Now, which makes sense because they probably get pitched a bunch of stuff. Much of that stuff is not very good. And so I think it's helpful to have, your end customers in mind, but I think to start with these communities that you're already a part of, generally they're kind of people who have empathy for what you're doing, which maybe is a combination of entrepreneurship or no code or whatever, right? Like they're communities for these kinds of people already existing. And so that's kind of where I would start. For me, that was Hacker News. I might use my Twitter audience, indie hackers. There are a bunch of kind of places I think to go to. I've heard subreddits are phenomenal for this. Right. Even today, like people, are constantly helping each other out on subreddits and things like that. And then I would probably put together like a set of materials, everything in one single place, right? You can just send someone a single URL and that has all the information there. I am a big fan of Notion. So that's what I generally use, which is I start by kind of just brain dumping why, I have this problem and, what the solution may look like. And I spend a lot of my time thinking about the problem, make sure that I'm noting it down the right way. And then I kind of show other people. I say, hey, I wrote a memo about this company that doesn't exist. What do you think? And I'll ping one-on-one, like one by one, serially. I'll ping people that I know, that I respect, both what they're doing. I would love them as customers potentially, but also like I know that they're good at, they're good at building businesses. They're good at this part of the company building cycle, right? And so I would send it to people. I'd get feedback. I'd iterate, every single question, every single uncertainty. I use the framework ABCD. So awesome, boring, confusing, didn't believe. So A is great. Everything else is negative. I like starting with the A because it's important to start on a nice note, but then it's like, tell me what sucks, right? What's boring? Basically, what can I get rid of that I don't need? What's confusing? What can I clarify, edit, update? And D, didn't believe, which is like the fundamental, like, I don't actually believe this is a problem, or I don't believe this is the right solution. Right. So that's kind of my framing. I use this for science fiction. I use this for product. I use this for everything that I write. ABCD, really simple framework. And I get a bunch of bug fixes. I fix them. I do it over and over again, ping different people until I have like a really high quality Notion doc, and ideally a Figma prototype as well. And so at some point in the process, I start visualizing it. Well, what does this actually look like? If I've written down the problem and the solution and it seems to jive with people, everyone has a different image in their head of what I'm actually talking about, right? What does that look like? And so I'll start prototyping it in Figma, really basic, not super pretty, very minimal, normally in like a tiny 600 by 800 pixel window, just to kind of put everything, the logo, the header, the navigation, the footer, all the bits that you might not actually think about, and make it feel as real as possible. And then I use Figma's prototype function to kind of, say, if you click this button, take them here. And then effectively within like a few hours, you can have like a thing, a set of images that looks like it's doing something, right? And then I'll embed that into the Notion doc. And then all of a sudden this Notion doc is like, effectively it's a pitch deck, right? It has everything that you would need to have to effectively say, is this worth investing? It just, instead of investing money as an investor, you'd be investing your time, right? And effort. And And generally, I think that's it's kind of a good exercise to go through, and it gets you better and better at like writing really high quality words that communicate the purpose. And that's kind of where I would start. And I think for you, I think like a really clear next step is to basically find one other person who has a similar problem, which is probably not that hard to do. And then just figure out like, what is the tree? Like, imagine if your use case is over here and their use case is over here. There's a certain set of sort of commonality, right? Like problems that you both have. And then there's also all sorts of different things, right, that are like unique to you or unique to them, right? And so you basically want to like almost write like a Notion doc for yourself, a Notion doc for them, and then like what is the Notion doc that fits both of these, right? So for example, you might not say Airdev, you might say company, right? Like you basically start to abstract away the specifics of what you're building until that sort of, kind of master document answer, fits their use case and fits your use case. And I think that's a really great way to say, okay, this is the abstracted out version that I can build and sell to thousands of people, right? Because if it fits me and it fits them, it probably fits a bunch of other different kinds of combinations. But even just going from 1 to 2 is going to get you half the way there. And then, going from 2 to 3 will get you to like 75%, et cetera, right? Kind of to reach full certainty that you've built kind of a specification document that if you build a product that mirrors it, you're going to solve all these problems, right? And problem solving is like, I always use save money, save time, and make money. Those are kind of the 3 things that you can help people do. Effectively, if you're building a business, you're helping somebody do one of those 3 things. Not always, there's some other ones, but like make money, save time are kind of the 3 things that if you do those, the marketplace will pay you to do those things, right? Generally, like economics 101, economic utility, et cetera. And so, I think like the majority of what this does is save time. Like that's the core value, right? So you basically just have to do this manually, make a list of all the things you do manually, and then say, okay, what can we automate? What takes me time? Okay, it takes me 4 hours for every new person. Okay, well, why? What do those 4 hours entail? Maybe even like add them to the Notion doc. If we automate this, this is an hour of the 4. If we automate this, and the goal is we can basically take this 4-hour thing and turn it into 4 minutes, right? Or turn email, click a button, done, right? But step 1 is going to be, let's make this take 3 hours instead of 4. And that might be just like taking in a bunch of data that they've entered via Airtable. So instead of you entering all this data, now that you get them to enter all this data, and then you just copy paste and boom, you're now at 3 hours instead of 4 hours, right? The other thing I would think about, depending on how you want to sell the thing, and I think this is a really underrated way of building software, is it looks automated to the customer, but you're doing all the manual stuff, right? So for example, in Gumroad's case, like I manually paid everybody out every month for years, like literally like would go into PayPal and just pay everyone out and then decrement their balances in our database. And that worked for like 1.5 years. And it took like 4 or 5 hours every Saturday, but it made sense. And eventually I automated it, right? But like creators assumed it was automated the whole time. And I think that's also a really healthy like way to approach building business is you don't have to automate 100% of it, and you don't have to do it all before you launch, right? You can sort of hire people at 15, 20, 30 bucks an hour and then get them to do a lot of the manual work, automate the top layer of it, like kind of the wrapper around it. And then within the company, you can work on automating more and more of the manual parts as well, right? So for example, at Gumroad today, there's around 15 minutes to an hour of work that I have to do every week that's not automated. Everything else is automated. Like I don't have to do anything else. The business basically runs itself. I have to approve invoices from contractors. I have to move money around every once in a while. I have to sign some stuff every once in a while. That's about it. That's all I have to do on a kind of a weekly basis, quarterly basis, et cetera. But in the beginning, a lot more of this stuff was manual, or I would hire someone to do it for me, right? That's like an amazing tactic that you can do once you have money, is you just pay somebody $30 an hour, and your time hopefully is worth more than that. And you can kind of keep doing that until you're only really doing the stuff that you really either want to be doing or that you're the most efficient at doing, which hopefully, if you have humility, it's like close to nothing, right? Like there's very few things that only I can do and I can do best out of all the people in the world, right? So at least that's what I found personally. There's certain things that I think I'm really good at, and I try to focus on those things, but but most of the stuff I try to kind of outsource unless I really just enjoy doing it myself, right? And then I just say it. I'm not the right person to be doing this. I don't care because it's fun and I'm allowed that, right?
Yeah.
And I'll do it on the weekends or whatever, like, or it'll be additive to everybody. But yeah, that's kind of how I would think about it. It's just kind of like build a Notion doc, build a Figma prototype, send it to people, get feedback on it. It's like the equivalent of if you're writing a story, getting feedback on your outline or first draft or first chapter. And then I would worry about, okay, what does building it actually look like? How much do I want to automate? How much of it is generalizable? And then kind of based on that, you can start, and then the other thing is like, I always like to think about MVPs in weekend projects, like how, instead of saying what is the right MVP, which I think is like very difficult to determine, because everyone is going to have a different conception of what that means. I like to think about it like I have a weekend to ship this. And so therefore the MVP is whatever I can do in a weekend, right? And so you kind of have to like figure that out and then work backwards from there. So, I'd think about, okay, like in a weekend, I could probably build like this whole thing, no code in probably like a day. And so I'll probably do that first. And I'll use like Webflow or Notion, Super, Zapier, MailChimp, ConvertKit, like a bunch of these tools together, Airtable, et cetera. And then I would say, okay, I can probably do this in like 4 to 8 hours and make sure that it works. And, there's still some manual stuff happening here, but it's like much more automated than it was. And it's only for me. It's maybe not for anybody else. Like I can just use it to automate myself. And if someone wants me to do this for them, then I have to like fork this thing in Airtable and change the copy in Airtable or whatever, to make it work for them. And then the next day I would probably think about, okay, what can I build like a little dashboard that they can log into, and then all the text, basically days since sign up and the text of the email is now, they can type that in or they can edit it. And then therefore, boom, all I have to do is like, effectively get them to log in, pay, invoice them, probably via Stripe, no code solution, mark them as, a user in the database on Airtable so they can go into their admin and log in. And then they can add, maybe you autofill the first time, but then, they add like 1 day, send them this email, 2 days, send them this email. Maybe you add features that like say, once on day 0, you add them to Slack automatically. And on day 10, you remove them from Slack automatically or whatever the manual kind of thing. I know this is not for a cohort based thing, so some of these not be useful. And I would highly recommend being super specific. Like if it solves your problem and their problem, great. Don't worry about solving everybody's problem, right? Don't abstract this out to be like, oh, this is a solution for all onboarding ever, right? It's for cohorts, it's for schools, it's for employees, it's for companies, it's for contractors. Like I would probably not start there. I'd kind of try to be more specific and like, okay, this is for remote companies who are onboarding asynchronous employees, but not only async, like a hybrid of async and live is probably what I would focus on, right? And then I would build for that use case where it's like, okay, every single person coming into this, basically they have an email, they have a legal name, they probably have a country of residence, they have a job title, and then that would be like my Airtable form, and then those are the inputs into this thing, and then the rest is kind of pseudo manual until you kind of automate more and more of that over time. But at the beginning, it's like literally you just copy, maybe you give access to this Coda document to these customers, they edit it, and then you're the one actually, or you hire someone to actually be doing the emailing literally manually or close. And then over time, you can like use Google Mail API or SendGrid or whatever to kind of like automate it further and further and further and add these integrations with Slack or whatever those things may look like over time.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was a lot, but
yeah, no, that's awesome. This idea of a business memo that you share with people, I find super captivating. I want to
the danger, by the way, just really quickly, the danger with my strategy, right? So kind of the other side of the argument, devil's advocate, would be it's sometimes too satisfying, right? Because like I write decently well, I can design. And so sometimes I can like build this beautiful pit. Sometimes it's tempting. I'm like, man, I could just run around like pitching vaporware and raising like millions of dollars, with the way the market is right now. But sometimes I'm careful not to share too much because it gives me the satisfaction of having done the hard work already.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Where like Derek Sivers talks about this often, right? Where he has a blog post called Zip It, which actually I looked into it because I wanted to put it in my book. And one great thing about writing a traditionally published book is they'll fact check you on everything that you put in there. And so they fact check me. They're like, is this true? Turns out it's not true. But Derek Sivers would basically say, one way to lose weight, or one of the worst ways to lose weight, is to tell everybody you're going to lose weight, because then you get the satisfaction, the social kind of, hey, congrats, blah, blah, blah. And then you feel good. And then you didn't actually do anything. You've
already got the
if you save it,
hit.
then you kind of have to keep going, because you're never going to get the full reward and gratification until you actually do the hard work. Apparently that data, like, it's not actually true. There's some studies, there's some anti-studies, like,
really?
Yeah. Okay. But I can say, for me personally, it is true. Like, for me personally,
me too.
Yeah. It's like, when I don't tell anybody, I generally work harder, faster. And because I want to show people, I really do want, it's like my own carrot on a stick, right? I do want to show someone a beautiful product, but it has to be a product, not a prototype or what have you. Right. And it changes things now. I have a team and other things that, like, maybe change the calculus of how kind of, how far you get without telling anyone else or what have you. But I do think, like, the Notion memo generally is a pretty good, because ultimately, you're investing, right? You're investing your time instead of, your money, but it should read like an investment memo in a sense, right? Like, this is the problem. This is the solution. This is why I believe it's important to invest my time. This is, like, how I approach the MVP. This is how I'm thinking about go to market. You need something that people can effectively look at and say, I disagree or agree with that, right? Which I think it's much more effective to do. Like, I never basically tell people my ideas in person. If they're like, hey, let me, what are you thinking about? And I'm like, well, I can literally email you. Like, I'll link you like 10 Notion docs of, like, I have a billion random things that I like to think about and edit and refine and whatever, but I'm not going to tell you them in person, because there's no opportunity. Like, I'm not taking notes, and you're not thinking deep. You're, like, reacting in the moment, like, because you're, it's awkward to just stare silently at this thing for 20 minutes. Right. So I find that the asynchronous nature for me is really effective, but, again, people may have their own experiences that, they should follow.
Yeah. There's a few things I want to dive into here. So I guess one of them is just, it's on this overall strategy of, this idea that you're investing your time. So you want to invest your time wisely. I come from a no-code background where it could take just as much time to write up a long business memo as it could be to just, like, build this initial version with the, like, we have at Airdev, we have a framework for Bubble, the no-code tool. So we could basically just, like, let's just add a dashboard page and then add this block and then add this block and then change a little bit of logic and just sort of string it all together in, like, not much time at all. I could do all that. And a lot of people in the no-code community love doing that kind of stuff because they love the act of creation, right?
Yeah. This is amazing.
Which is fantastic. But then the challenge from that point of view is then, well, how do you get people to actually use it? How do you know what you've built actually solves somebody's problem? So can you say something about that as maybe as an alternative strategy? At the end of the day, I've got to find that first person who also solves my problem. Could I just show them a working prototype and get them to react to, could I, since we have the internet, I don't need to go knocking on doors, could I just, like, create my app and nobody knows who I am, nobody cares, and then just, like, post it in a whole bunch of places or run some ads and get people to it? Or
no, I think that's fair. I think, if people have an inclination to build, great, right? Because you're already in the top 10% by just building. Like, most people don't. So I think that's great. Right. However, I do think that once you have built stuff and you know that you're capable of building stuff end to end, then I would say, honestly, slow down, because I find there's a couple archetypes that I find in the no code kind of movement. One is you just build, and you basically, what it means is you never, like, wait for anything to stick, right? And, like, you kind of think, oh, I just built this thing. No one, it does well on Product Hunt or whatever. And then, 3 months later, no one's using it anymore. And you have like 3 other projects and you kind of just do that over and over and over and over again. Right. Like,
Yeah.
and I think that,
But know how that feels.
yeah, it's great to learn. I had a tweet the other day. It was kind of something like, quantity over quality when you're learning, quality over quantity when you're earning, right? Which is effectively like when you're learning, you want to do the kind of pottery, right, thing where you just do a bunch and you get better faster. But once you have gone through the whole cycle and you kind of know you're pretty decent, then I think it's like, okay, well, what do you want to use your time against, right? Because if you spend 5 hours on a great idea, versus like 50 hours on bad ideas, like the 5 hours on a great idea is much more beneficial to you, right? In terms of like, if you want to be financially independent or start a business or these goals, like that's probably not going to come from, and it's also like, I think some people think it's a numbers game. Like, oh, if I ship 50 things, one of them will work. I think there's an element to that. Like there's definitely an element of randomness here, but it's much less deterministic than you think, right? Or sorry, much less probabilistic than you think. It would be like saying dating is a numbers game. Like dating is not a numbers game. Or maybe it is to a degree a numbers game.
It's probably a balance, a sweet spot, right? Between
exactly. But if you just copy paste the same, email to a million people, it's not a numbers game. It is 0.001%. It's a 0%. Like a numbers game is 0. Like the number is 0, right? Ideally, you are building relationships with people. You are getting to know them, and your conversion rate should be much higher than 0. Like it should not feel like a numbers game to you. And that goes for dating, that goes for building a company, acquiring customers, like all of these sorts of things. It should not feel like, I would say on average, if you have a really good business idea and you have the ability to build it, your odds of success, meaning let's say 100K ARR, should be 30%, which means effectively 1 in 3 ideas you have to this level of quality, and you've kind of run through the Figma and the Notion and all these stuff, and you actually say, okay, I'm going to go build this. My guess is like, it should be able to kind of subsume your living, which I kind of just assume is kind of $100,000 a year, in a year or 2. Like, I really believe that it should be sort of 30% odds. And so I think many people think the hardest thing is building. And the beauty of today is that it's no longer the hardest thing. Maybe it was, but now many people can build. It's getting easier and easier to build. And the hard part is actually talking to customers, building the right thing, selling to them, marketing to them. That stuff is a lot harder. In my view, it's a lot harder than actually the act of building. Not to say the act of building isn't hard, but like, it's kind of more objective. It's more deterministic. Like, can you build this or not? Which is very different from like, will anyone use it or not? And what I find in the no code, like I started a Discord weekend project weekend where I kind of built this weekend project live on YouTube. People can check it out if they want. And I asked people like, what are you building? Right. And a couple of people did build things, which is cool. But so many people were like, I built a reminder app, or I built a to-do list app, or I built like a productivity note-taking app or whatever. And literally the commonality here and the key word is specificity. None of these ideas are specific enough, right? And the problem with these general ideas is, yes, you have this problem, like you want a better note-taking app or reminder app or to-do list app or whatever, group planning apps, split billing app. These are like ideas that everybody has, right? And the reason everyone has them is because everyone has this problem. They think it should be solved. It's not solved. And they build it, and then they realize that like they've just built a generic thing, and like no one actually wants to use their version of it. And they don't even know who to talk to because it's not specific, right? Like if I say this app is for engineers with pink hair, like if you have a friend in your life, someone who's an engineer with pink hair, you're going to think of them immediately. But if I say this is for people, you're not even going to come up with that person. You're not going to come up with anybody else, right? Like just, it's too, you're not Coke, right? Like you can become Coke over decades, but in the beginning, you are not Coke. You are like a very specific, sassafras root beer for gluten-free vegans, right? Like you want to be as specific as possible because then you know exactly who you're going after, right? Like you're like, oh yeah, there's a subreddit for those people, or there's like a meetup for those people. And I find that is a huge problem. Like people get stuck on, oh, I'm going to, and I do worry a little bit about the no code an ecosystem, because there are so many templates, because there are so many ways, kind of people are like, oh, there needs to be a marketplace for college dorms at Stanford during the summer or whatever, right? And then they just like build it, and then they just think it needs to exist, and they kind of know what it looks like, but they actually haven't done the creative work of like, well, what does it actually need to do? What is unique to this situation? And that's why I love Notion and Figma, is because they're like, there's no rules. Like, it's just text, it's just, shapes and text, right? Like, it's just whatever goes. And it forces you to really think through, like, from first principles, what do we need? For example, if you're building Tesla, like, you kind of have to say, okay, what do we need? Well, effectively, what does a car do? It effectively goes from A to B, right? Like, we know we need to be able to do that. Okay, well, what do you need to go from A to B? Well, the cheapest way to go from A to B is rolling friction, right? Like, why is it expensive to go from A to B? Well, friction, right? Otherwise it would be free. Anyway,
Goddamn friction.
So friction sucks, right? And so what is the best kind of friction? Like the friction that we like to use generally when moving on the ground from A to B, rolling friction, because rolling friction has a lower coefficient than sliding friction and static friction, right? You want wheels. So, okay, then you need wheels, right? This is something we figured out a long time ago. Every car, every horse carriage, like bikes, we have wheels, right? Then it's a question of, okay, how many wheels? And then like literally like build up from zero, and you will end up with a much better product than what currently exists, which is like forking, like, oh, we have this car, we're just going to replace the engine with, a battery and a drivetrain, electronic drivetrain, and boom, you're done, right? Electric drivetrain. And it's often not that simple. And then, it's like, okay, who do we build for? Like, the brilliant thing Tesla did, it was like, we're going to build for Californians who need or want electric cars that they can literally only charge at home. And, like basically nobody, like literally statistically 0% of the world would want a Tesla. But they picked this very specific group of people that really wanted this specific thing. It cost a stupid amount of money. I think there were literally 400 people that bought the first Tesla car. Can you believe that? Like, starting a company and your first cohort of customers for your first car model ever is 400 people. Like, I get more likes on a tweet than that. And that was Tesla's first. So like, you can start really small, be really, really specific, and specific to the point where it like almost doesn't make sense. And then, and work with Figma, Notion, like don't like use the no-code tools once you're ready to start building, for sure. But I think in the ideation process and the feedback gathering process, it's nice to kind of almost take a step back and make sure you're actually refining your ability to come up with good ideas, iterate on them. And by the way, it's also a lot easier and cheaper to iterate. Like, let's say someone's like, hey, this doesn't make sense to me. I can go on Notion, edit the sentence, done, right? It's already there. It's live. It's reflected for everybody. Figma, same thing, right? Pretty easy. But if you have a note, if you, the more you build, the harder it is to like listen to feedback, honestly, right? Because you're like, oh crap, like I'm going to have to re-architect this whole thing, or I'm going to have to use a totally different database schema, or, I have to nuke all this user data and start from scratch. Like, you really want to avoid the sunk cost fallacy, which means like you want to start with like this kind of, in one way, it's very high fidelity, right? Because it's like text, it's Figma prototypes. But it's very easy to change, very low stakes, I guess, right? Like, you want to get feedback on that. Like, just like, for example, like I don't get feedback on my book. I get feedback on the outline for the book and the proposal for the book and the first chapter of the book. And over time, like later and later into the, I get feedback on the entire book. But I've already committed to writing the book at that point. Like, by the time I'm getting feedback, like that's, 3 months out from publication sort of thing. Like, I've already done so much of the work. So I think that's really, really important. Is sort of, start with the kind of the the design space of nothing. Otherwise you think you're learning. Like, for example, you can copy the Mona Lisa. You break it up into grids and you literally just paint, you draw it out, and you can do it. You just enough grids, right? Like, if you can't do it with 4x4, you do like 4,000 by 4,000, and you just get. And by the way, this is how murals are done. This is how professional painting is often done, is like in this way. So anyone can do it. It just takes a lot of time. But will that teach you anything about painting? My guess is no. It's like, you can copy it, you can make the Mona Lisa, but no, you haven't learned anything about perspective, value, edge, you'll pick up on stuff, but it's much better to start from zero and move to that, right? And so it's the same thing. It's like if you're skipping all this stuff and you're just building Airbnb for tents, then you haven't actually gone through the learning that they went through, right? I kind of consider it like you're being dropped in the middle of a forest. Like, yes, you can be dropped where they are, but then what do you do from there? You don't have the muscles, you don't have the map, you don't have the intuition, you don't have the food, like you don't have all the things that they have built up over time to get to where they are. And that's why they can go another step further where you're like, oh, I'm dead. Like I can't do anything. I don't have the skills. I don't have the know-how. I don't have the trust of the community. And so I think, you kind of have to go from zero to where they are. You cannot skip. Like it doesn't work. So anyway, that's a lot of how I would think about it. But I remember like distinctly, like one huge issue is just people who are they think that they need to build for everyone. They're like, oh, I have a problem with sleeping, so I'm going to build like a sleep tracking app. And it's like, if everyone has this problem, no one's going to use your solution, right? But if it's like 1% of people have this problem, then maybe that 1% of people will be like, oh wow, you built something for me personally, so I'm actually gonna. That's a risk that you took, not building for the other 99%, and I'm going to reward you by like investigating this deeper than I otherwise would, right? So it's kind of like if you try to juggle 20 balls, you will catch 0 of them, but if you try to throw up 1 ball, you'll probably catch the 1 ball, right? And then over time you can train to getting to catching 10 balls, or 20 or whatever. But like in the beginning, you cannot go from 0 to 10 or 0 to even 0 to 2. Like you have to go from 0 to 1 and 1 to 2, 2 to 3, etc. And you will build the muscle and the hand-eye coordination, all the other things that you need to be able to do that along the way. But yeah, I think so many people, they just start like, oh, I'm going to build I see this all the time. Like people are like, I'm going to build Gumroad. And I'm like, sure, I guess. But, you're not learning. I think, you're not really learning how to build Gumroad by building Gumroad, right?
Yeah.
Ultimately.
Yeah. Yeah. That's I think of an analogy to like culture where your example being dropped in the forest. If there's a tribe of people living in that forest, it's because they've lived there for a very long time. There's been a process of iterative learning over generations to figure out how to survive in that environment. And if you're just dropped in, right, you can download their culture and you can survive in that environment. But you can't just take what they've learned and just apply it to kind of like a different environment. It's not gonna fit. You actually have to go through the process yourself of go on, sorry.
Yeah, well, there's a great book. I actually haven't read the book, but this author, I was just typing it to look it up, but basically Gall's Law, which is the guy John Gall, he has written a lot about systems design, and he has a book, Systemantics, which is basically like the one-liner is a complex system that works is invariably found to have evolved from a simple system that worked.
Yep.
Right. And the inverse is generally also true, which is like a complex system that doesn't work often, basically like if it works, it came from a system that did work, and every system that works came from that way. And the way that you get to a complex system is basically by starting with a small system and building layering in more complexity over time, which is big, and I think it's a key theme of the Minimalist Entrepreneur, but generally it's always true, right? I mean, think about, has there ever been a car that went from 0 to 5 miles an hour? No, it went from 0 to 0.0000001, right? Sort of, there is some constraint. So maybe you could argue like the universe is discrete and, therefore you can go from 0 to a non-zero number, but it's, a Planck second or whatever the, Planck, whatever the distance is, the smallest distance in the universe or something. So there's some limits, but yeah, generally a complicated system, like if you want to build or like Amazon is a phenomenal example of this. Like Amazon is mind-boggling. Like they do something like 2 million packages an hour. That's incomprehensible to anybody. I mean, that's insane. And this is news to me. They deliver a majority of their products. They are literally like, you see the Amazon trucks everywhere now, right? Like they are literally delivering. They used to rely like 5-10 years ago on like UPS or whatever, right? Like They literally deliver something like 73% of their own packages now.
Is that global?
I assume no, but maybe.
Okay.
But I assume just in the US. But
Yeah.
incredible.
Yeah.
No one, literally not a single human being on planet Earth could build that system.
Yeah.
Not Bezos, not anyone who works at Amazon, not the entire company of Amazon. The only way to build that system is to start with, we only ship books from a warehouse in Seattle, and add in a new warehouse, add in a new SKU, and literally do that millions and millions of times until you have what you have today, which is just like an organism that nobody understands, but that just works.
Yep.
And it works because it needed to work. And when something broke, it was fixed. And when something broke, it was fixed. And when something needed to scale, it scaled. And a billion of those iterations happened. And now you have this machine that delivers 2 million packages an hour. And by the way, like, will at some point deliver 20 million packages an hour. Like, it's so early. It's sci-fi. I mean, it's like, it's crazy. And it's like, I mean, if you've ever read about like some of these cryptocurrencies, like, it's bonkers. Like, if you said there's going to be effectively there's like a computer, a single computer, right? Every cryptocurrency is effectively kind of like one computer in a sense, right? Like one ledger, right? That everyone mutually agrees upon. There's one ledger for every cryptocurrency that, in theory, every single human being can read and write to. How is that even possible? Like 7 billion computers, like my iPhone can, like, but how can I not beat, how do you not have race conditions and all these other sorts of crazy stuff? And it's like, well, we started with a very simple internet, which was like ARPANET or whatever back in the day, with like 7 computers connected, or probably in the beginning 2, and then 7, and then 15, and now then 1500. And over time we built new technology, new this and new that, and like we just kept doing it over and over and over again until we had like the internet, which is bonkers. Like, I can't, billions of people using the same internet at the same time. And now, crypto, which is like effectively one money that we're all kind of using at the same time. But like the GPU required to make Ethereum, for example, happen is it's bonkers. Like, it's just, it's like a gazillion, trillion, billion, whatever gigaflops a second to make it happen. And we all have to be doing it and validating, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, it's absolutely bonkers. But I don't know, it gets me excited to be like, oh, wow, we're still so early. Like, at some point in the future, I assume we will have, fully automated factories where you can say, I designed a shape in, like a, I don't know, like a monitor or something like that. And I just hit print and it just like makes it, and it's fully automated, and like, we'll get there. It'll just take lots and lots and lots and lots of iteration over time. And we'll have space factories, and we'll have like, a halo around the sun that collects, like all this stuff will happen. Because they're all possible by laws of physics, but you have to start with like a no-code app, right? Like, you have to start with the very, just like Elon, like he didn't start with Tesla and SpaceX. He started with Zip2, which is like an online file sharing service or something like that. Like, literally, like very minimalist entrepreneur style, right? Like, what can I build that people will pay for? And I don't have to pay money to build. And, that's the arb. And then over time you can like build on top of that and sell it, and then start PayPal, and then sell that and start SpaceX and blah, blah, blah.
Your way. Can I bring it to a very tactical level for a moment? Not that I love don't love the abstract conversation, but just in terms of this first initial group of potential customers, like even if that's just like one person, I think because a lot of us in the no-code space are very comfortable flexing our building fingers, the idea of reaching out to real humans that we don't know and saying, hey, look at me, look at what I've built, is kind of scary. So how do you recommend going about that process? What should the actual messaging be? Like, this is a stranger. How do I figure out who they are with the problem? Like, if they even have the problem, like, I want them, obviously they have some value for me in terms of there's this implicit knowledge that I want to extract from their brain, but I'm also trying to sell them on giving them something in return for that
Yeah.
knowledge.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great place to go. One, I would say, don't hold back the reason you are emailing them or DMing them or calling them or whatever it may be. Like, I think it's really, like, there's nothing, and I get a lot of this, so maybe I'm too biased maybe in this direction, but I get people all the time that are like, hey, do you have 5 minutes? And it's like, for what exactly? But I get those all the time, like literally every day, like dozens a day, right? Like tons and tons of that. I get very few, though I get a few, but I get very few of people who are like, hey, I saw that you have this problem. I built this to solve it because I also have this problem. Or maybe I'm wrong. You don't actually have this problem. That's fine too, right? Like, but I built this. Let me know what here's the link. Let me know what you think, best Sahil kind of thing, right? And like, that's it. Like, I just give everything away. I link them to whatever the thing is. I say exactly what I want from them. And I do it one by one. Like, I send somebody an email. I find their personal email somewhere. Hopefully it's available online. Otherwise, I generally won't email them. Then I'll do it again and I'll do it again. And I'll just, like, my mental model will improve and I'll get better and better and better at writing those kinds of emails. Right. But generally, I always like to include something like, hey, I think you have this problem that I also had. I solved it. If I'm right and you do have this problem, let me know what you think. Otherwise, no worries. Let me know if I can help otherwise. But see, right. And like, I think just being really direct, being specific, like, it's like a very short email, right? Very terse. It's not like, here's like 50 things or like read this like saga of why I built this. It's really like, I think very customer centric, which is like, you either have this problem or you don't. And if you have this problem, here's my solution to it. And if you don't, fine, like, move on. Like, I don't want to waste any of your time, right? And so I personally think it's a win-win. But I find, and the question that I've started to ask people pretty rarely, because I don't know if I'm messaging it the right way, but it's basically the question that I ask people is, in my head, is, what problem are you trying to solve by sending me this message? So if someone sends me a message saying, hey, do you have 5 minutes to talk on the phone? What problem are you trying to solve by sending me this message? Which has kind of a double meaning, right? One is, tell me the problem. Like, why are you calling me specifically is one part of it. But then two, what is the problem you're trying to solve? Like, what are you actually going to ask for help with, right? In a sense, like, the one problem you have is, I need to tell people about this. Or I don't know, maybe it's you're raising money for your startup and you need, the problem you're really trying to solve is like, I need money for my startup and I don't know any investors and you seem very open and accessible, but I feel bad telling you that I want your money. And so, like, it's either that, or it's like, there's another problem that you actually need help with. That's an actual tactical question. And if you just told me that tactical question, then I'd be able to help you. I found generally that people who follow this framework of like, hey, I don't want to actually tell you what problem I have until it's live, like we're talking live, I would say basically just want my time, just want to build a relationship, just want my money. Like, they actually don't have a thing that I can help them with like that, which is why they're moving to a phone call or moving to some sort of, or trying to, is because they're like, they know they're not going to get me, in an email. And so they need to have me, it's kind of like, do you have 5 minutes? Like, I've never had a 5-minute phone call with anybody. So like, obviously you want more than 5 minutes. And I used to be annoying and, after 5 minutes be like, hey, you said 5 minutes, gotta go. And they're like, what? And I'm like, now I don't even, now I realize it's a waste of everybody's time. So I just don't respond to those anymore. But yeah, I think it's like, just be really clear, really direct, and hope for the best sort of thing, and don't tweet, like, don't do these bulk things like, hey, like, for example, if I was raising money for my venture fund, I wouldn't just like tweet out, even though it sometimes seems like I do this. Like, I wouldn't just tweet out and say, hey, does anyone want to be an LP in my fund? I'm going to invest in 100 startups next year. Even though my LP list is bonkers, like, it's great. I'm very good, I think. What works is DMing a bunch of people one by one and saying, hey, next year I'm starting a new, vintage of my fund. And like, I have a few spots. Let me know if you're interested. Happy to talk. Here's a memo, here's some investments I've done, or let me know if you need anything else, like blah, blah, blah. Because people want that. Like, people want to know that you're solving their problem specifically and that you reached out to them specifically. You've actually it costs you something, right? But if it didn't cost you anything, if you just say, hey, do you have 5 minutes of your time, right? How many people did you DM that to? 1,000, 100, just me? I have no way of knowing. But if you say, hey, I know you have this problem at Gumroad because I saw it, and only one person can get that email, right? Like very few people can get that email. It's not obviously not bulk. And so I reward that kind of, time spent, but you have to be willing to do it. Just like dating, right? Just going back to that example, maybe it's tired at this point, but it's the same thing. Like you don't want to just like bulk, hey, what's up? What's up? What's up? What's up?
Don't copy and paste your pickup lines.
No,
that's the big takeaway.
Yeah, seriously. But many people think that that's like the right answer, and it's like, no, you have to. And the other thing, like the hardest thing about this is you deserve to get rejected. You deserve.
Yeah, right.
Like the truth is, like, you are not good enough yet. But the answer is not hiding it, making it you think it's a numbers game for longer than it is, like blah, blah, blah. Like, no, the answer is to be upfront with the fact that you suck. And that's fine because everyone sucks when they're a baby and we've all been babies before. And you get better, and you get better by getting one-on-one feedback over time and improving, giving it all away for free and getting better and getting feedback on that, and improving it. And then, and by the way, this takes time, right? It's not going to happen in, like, if you've just started building stuff today, you're probably, maybe you're amazing and you like, your first thing works and, you quit your job a year from now. But most people, I think it takes 3, 4, 5 years, which is fine. I think that's how long college takes for most people. So like, just think about it like you're switching careers and it's going to take a couple of years, right? But the other thing is it almost definitionally takes that much time because, again, people want to know that you've actually put in the work. And so if you just started this thing, like I've invested in people just because they didn't give up after 2 years. I'm like, wow, if you haven't given up in 2 years after this, I want to invest, right? Literally, like there's no shortcut to that requirement. You have to spend 2 years kind of thing. So I think that the same goes here too. It's like you want to be willing to put in the time. And instead of, if you put in like 10 seconds 1,000 times, you're going to get a 0% conversion rate. But if you spend an hour 10 times, your conversion rate will be like 50%, So like you think you're saving time because you're trying not to waste time, but you're actually optimizing a 0% conversion rate, right? Whereas you might want to be optimizing like a 50% conversion rate. And your conversion rate should be just like the business thing, like double digits, like 10%, 20%, something like that. You should be hearing back and getting some feedback on. Otherwise you're talking to the wrong people. And, if you do that a bunch of times, then like work on a new thing and try it again and do it again and again. And eventually you will get there. But
can you talk a little bit about going from, and maybe this is already a step that you would think we've already done, but say we've talked to all of these people and maybe you are collecting this information in like an Airtable or something, like who you've contacted and maybe like what they do and some information like that. Like I'm curious if you have like if there's some tactical things that you do to manage that process as well. But my main question is, you want people to ultimately pay for this product. So in the book, you talk about like basically getting people to pay like as quickly as possible to validate your idea. Is there a tension there between you're trying to like learn from somebody and maybe you don't necessarily know what the product is yet, but yet you're asking someone to pay for it? Or is there a process where you'd expect you would talk to people, gather a bunch of learnings, come back to them with some working version and ask them to pay for it at that point? You've already built a relationship and now you're trying to convert them.
I mean, a good example of this is actually the Hacker News post for Gumroad. If you just Google show HN Gumroad, you'll find it. But basically, I literally said, like, I'm thinking about charging 30%. Let me know what you guys think, that sort of thing, right? And like, some people are like, that's insanely expensive, blah, blah, blah. Like, there's like a debate in the thread on it, and
right. But these were not your customers, right?
Yeah, these specifically, but some of them probably were, right? I mean, like the initial customers were all these kinds of random people, right?
Right.
So, I mean, I would probably just put in the email, like, by the way, the way I plan to charge for this is this way. Let me know what you think about that, right? Like, just think of it as another feature of the product that you're getting feedback on.
Mm.
That is what pricing is ultimately. It's like it's actually one of the most important features, which is how do you actually plan on charging for this? Is it a product? Is it SaaS? Is it a marketplace? Is it their take rate? Is there a commission? Is it advertising fueled? Is it subscription? Is it one-off? Like there's all these,
Right.
you will be wrong, but I do think it is important to say, I plan on charging, something like $10 a month or something, just to give them a sense of how you're thinking about it. I do
Right.
think is important.
So what I'm hearing implicit in there is that you're not coming to people as a salesperson for a product, or even like as a brand or anything. You're coming to them as an individual who's clearly trying to build this product, but you're being very open and direct about that fact. It's not some polished thing that you're already trying to like get somebody to
the other thing I
for.
think it's really important is you want, and there's a tension where you want some specificity, right?
Yeah.
But you also don't want, this is exactly how I plan to do it, and this is a product, and pay me if you want to use it, right? Like you do want some level of ambiguity, because you ultimately, if you want feedback, you want some level of constraint of, them able to kind of pick, oh, do this, do that, or whatever. But I do think specificity is probably, people are too ambiguous and should be more specific is my guess. And I think it's a similar fear. Like if you say it's $100, they might not respond. Where if you didn't say anything, they might have, right? That's the fear that it comes from, I think. But ultimately, I still think it's unfounded. Like I think the best thing to do is just be super transparent. Say, look, this is what I'm thinking about. Can always be changed. And I'm just very like, let me know. That's just my attitude is like, and I also find this is like a thing that I have often is like sometimes you don't want to go to these people to be told the answer, right? Like one thing that's frustrating to hear as a, I don't know, successful entrepreneur, whatever, that people ask for feedback is like, they want me to do all their work for them, right? They're like, hey, I have an idea, but then it turns out they really only have like a 2-sentence idea. They want to give me, they want me to do all the hard work, even though they might not realize like that's kind of what they're doing. But that's not what I like helping with. What I like helping with is when someone says, here's A, here's B. What do you like better? Right? Like that's awesome. One, it shows you've actually done a lot more work. It took more effort to get there. But two, it's a lot easier for me. And I can say, oh, B is better. And then I can do my own C for you based on what you've tried. And I can kind of triangulate what I would have done with option C. But if you just say, hey, I have an idea, it's, an iPhone app that helps you track your sleep, then, I'm like, okay, sounds fine, I guess. I don't know what to say there, but if you're like, here's a Figma mock of what I've built, I'd be like, oh, that's confusing to me. I don't like this. I would never use this. I would, I have this problem. I don't have this problem. It's interesting that you highlighted this. I never thought that was important, but it actually is, or whatever, right? Like, I think basically I want to know what you care about, what your point of view is, what your opinions are. And if that's not, hinted at somewhere in the, I just think you're not going to get a really good response. So yeah, I find that you want to have some level of thinking and specificity, but you also don't want to just say, this is what I'm selling. And it's literally just like, let me know what you think is kind of my hack, right? It's just like, every time I say it, even when I do like, I'm putting $1 million SPV together to invest in this startup. Here's what I think about the startup. What do you think? Let me know. We're like, that's how I don't know. No one expects me to know. I mean, I think like I deployed $20 million last year into startups. I have no idea what I'm doing. I have some idea, but like, but like, yeah, I've never been hurt by asking for more feedback or feeling, letting the door open for that kind of feedback, right? Like I'm always like, almost every email update I write is like, let me know if you have any questions or let me know what you think. Like always trying to get more and more feedback from people.
But with something very specific for people to react to.
Exactly. Yeah. Like I wouldn't say, hey, for example, right? It's like, hey, Gumroad's, I think a rookie move would have been like, hey, Gumroad is going to do some crypto stuff. What should we do? Right? Like that tweet would probably go viral. It would probably get hundreds of responses. Almost none of those responses would be useful to me. One, I've already thought about all those things, right? Like it's like, oh, we should do NFTs. We should do that. Right? Like all the obvious low-hanging fruit is done. And no one cares enough. Like they're just going to say, this is what I want you to do. Not what you should do. What Gumroad should do. Just like, oh no, this is what I want. But you know, if I wrote a long memo in Notion and maybe use Figma and say, hey, we've been, obviously, because we're a creator economy company, we've been thinking about crypto stuff. We haven't done anything yet for a variety of reasons. Here are 3 of the reasons. This is what I think might be a good MVP that allows us to test these things, but also not, you know, these reasons are still valid. So these are the ways that around them. Here's a Figma mock. Let me know what you think, right? And then I would send that to a bunch of people one by one, and surprise, that's exactly what I'm doing, right? Like,
right.
not very hypothetical, but yeah, I found that like when you really, and I see this like other startups do this all the time. It's like no one cares. Like you think people care more about you than you do, than they actually do, right? Like people are not on Twitter being like, oh, how can I help Sahil today with his problems? No, they're busy with their own problems, right? So you want to make it really easy for them to help. And I think the best way to do that is to be super specific, give it all away up front, and then prove, like, make it very obvious that you've put in a lot of work already. By the time it's hitting my inbox, it should be like, wow, I'm reading the 10th draft of this email, not the first, right? So yeah, that's kind of how I think about it.
Yeah, that's very tactical, specific stuff to think about. I am conscious of the fact that we're close to time here, so this might be a good place to wrap up. So I just want to thank you, first of all, putting up with all of those issues with the live stream at the beginning, but we got there. Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you.
Awesome.
For everybody watching, of course, Sahil is the author of The Minimalist Entrepreneur, which is a fantastic read. If you're in the no-code space and are looking for a little bit more of a framework for going beyond just building stuff, highly recommend giving it a go. But yeah, thanks again, Sahil. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks so much for having me. It was really fun.